Another long off-season week has arrived, so let's not waste any time. The Ohio State wide receivers are going to be awesome yet again. Welcome to The Beat. That is Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. It is another spring rewind, and we are looking at the best position group on the Ohio State roster, and dare I say, Birm, the best position group in America.
I think it's fine to say that. I do think it's also interesting to note that despite what we feel pretty confident about, that this is the best position group top to bottom on the Ohio State roster, maybe the best room in America, regardless of position. It does feel like this is a group that has some questions on it to me. I know there's the top three that are reliable and dependable and guys that have been in the program, and then obviously the superstar in Jeremiah Smith. But I still feel like there's actually a lot of questions behind those guys. And it shapes up for an interesting year for Brian Hartline, taking over as the offensive play caller and really diving more into the offensive coordinator role that he was given in 2023 than he had to before. And to do that at a time when you have some questions. And there's a ton of talent. There's no doubt about that. And those top five guys that we see here returning, Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate, Bryson Rogers, Jeremiah Smith, Mylan Graham, are all extremely talented. But outside of Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith, no one's really had an opportunity to make plays. And so now it's about who's able to do that for Brian Hartline, and how much is the Brian Hartline development track disrupted by his new responsibilities as the offensive coordinator. So obviously he's got Devin Jordan working with him. Devin's a former Ohio State receiver as well, a guy that Brian's been working with for years. So I don't think a lot of the teaching points are going to be changed or anything like that. But when you have someone who's as good as Brian Hartline is at that spot, and then all of a sudden his attentions are divided, I think that it's worth noting heading into the season that there's a chance things could look a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think it's a point well made. You can have questions and intrigue, but it definitely helps when you're starting from such a position of strength, when you have, you're recruiting from the elite of the elite. I know Brian Hartline, bristles at that notion that he's the best recruiter in the country, or the best recruiter of wide receivers, or some combination of both, depending on your perspective. But, he is the most selective, can be the most selective position coach in the country, because the development track has proven that out. And you look year after year after year with first round picks and the guys that are signing up to play for him. Yeah, we don't know exactly what the rotation is going to look like, but even when you're talking about Quincy Porter coming in here, on any other program in the country, spring would have been about nonstop hype, and this guy could start right away. And he is in a log jam behind 6 other 4 and 5 star guys who have been waiting their turn or developing or immediately bursting on the scene like Jeremiah Smith did. So it is a reminder, I think, that just because you might, or we might have questions, and there is uncertainty about what all that looks like behind the top group. And even if we want to lump Brandon Inniss in that, we can. I mean, he's not been a every down wide receiver yet for Ohio State, and include the offensive coordinator transition for Brian Hartline and what those responsibilities look like. It didn't go swimmingly in that first sort of audition that he had a couple years ago in the spring, but he's certainly changed since then. And, if you have questions and it's about Ohio State wide receivers, I think you can pretty safely assume the answer is going to be positive.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a moment here or situation evolving where people should have concerns necessarily about, like, hey, can they keep this going? I do think that there are parts of it, like we're heading into a off season where probably the leader of the room is Brandon Inniss, right? And he's a guy that has not played a lot. He's the third receiver on that chart as far as playing time. And I don't know if he's going to be an NFL receiver in the mold of Terry McLaurin or not, but I'm trying to think of the last time that the leader of the room was not the best player in the room. And Terry probably developed into the best player in that room, and has become the best player out of that room from the 2015 to 2019 Buckeye receivers.
Mm-hmm.
But
Paris Campbell was pretty darn good.
Right. Paris was great. Johnny was really good. They, Ben Victor was an NFL player. They had some really good players there. But what Brandon does is changes the tenor of the entire room. And obviously on the field, the leader is Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. But Brandon Inniss has to be the guy to step up. And then Hartline's situation here, as far as what he's done as a recruiter, what he's done as a developer, those are unquestioned. I think the question marks I have moving forward are in this new era of college football, in the NIL era where you cannot sign, and Brian Hartline's made this comment before, Ryan Day's made this comment before, where you really can't go out and sign four first round picks every year. If you're the Buckeyes recruiting staff, like you were doing under Brian Hartline for a minute. So now the question is Brian Hartline an elite evaluator of talent? And I think that, so you're going to see how his reputation changes over these next couple of years. And to go back to your point about Quincy Porter, I do wonder if the Jeremiah Smith experience should serve as a whoa to people to expect a freshman to participate, or if it's an accelerator to expect freshmen to participate. Because Jeremiah Smith is so much different than anyone else that I don't know that even a guy like Quincy Porter, who is a consensus 5-star prospect, the number 3 ranked receiver in the country coming out of high school, 6'4", 210 pounds, Bergen Catholic High School out of New Jersey, one of the best programs in the country. There's all these reasons to look at a guy like that and say, okay, you should expect him to play. But I if you look at the rest of the lineup here for Ohio State, to break into that, you have to be an extraterrestrial. And I don't know that we should change our expectations.
Yeah, I would say that there's a pretty good reminder of that just on Ohio State's roster from last year, because if you rewind back to the first stock watch on the beat here, I had Mylan Graham in that, and we can talk about that at length even more if we want to. He did not get fast-tracked into the rotation a year ago, despite having really impressive practices, flashing in training camp, getting praise for his work ethic, doing all those things, because, for all of the positives, he wasn't Jeremiah Smith. He was not necessarily an extraterrestrial. I do think he's created in a lab as well to go play wide receiver, but not whatever one Jeremiah Smith was imported from. So I think if you're asking about like the acceleration or the change in expectations, you can just look back a year ago and say, well, Mylan Graham is also in this same sort of recruiting profile and upside and pedigree as Quincy Porter, and he had to wait a year. And now there's a lot of buzz, and I think he had some of the most sensational spring practices of anybody on this Ohio State roster, and I can't get a number of those catches in the open practices out of my head from him. But even still, when we've had this conversation going back and forth, you say, well, wait 1 second, because Bryson Rogers can do this too. And that's a reflection of the depth. But I do think it goes to your point, like that. If you think that Quincy Porter could just duplicate what Jeremiah Smith did a year ago, you're probably setting yourself up for disappointment. And Mylan Graham, I think, would be at the front of the line to say, hey, it's okay if it doesn't happen as a true freshman.
Yeah, Mylan's path was a touch different. He didn't enroll till June. Jeremiah enrolled early, Carnell enrolled early, Brandon enrolled early, Bryson enrolled early. All 4 of the 2025 signees, Quincy Porter, Phillip Bell, Isaiah Jones, and Bod Penn Miller, all enrolled early.
Brandon Inniss didn't, right?
Brandon did not. I'm sorry, you're right. He enrolled in technically in June, but he was in town starting in like April and never left. So, so you have a clearer path if you're a guy that's been there early. Which, again, as we head into year 3 of Brandon Inniss, like there might be a part of the reason why he's behind as far as how much he's contributed on the field. So the lesson is, if you're a wide receiver, you should enroll early. But
it's probably true for every position in this day and age.
Yeah, I think we've jumped the shark on that point anymore. Like there's no waiting around. If you can get to Ohio State, if you're good enough to play football at Ohio State, you should be good enough to enroll in January, and make sure your high school does you the solid. You know what I mean? Brian Hartline, what is the proper expectation for Brian Hartline heading into? See, this is funny because it's technically year 3 of being the offensive coordinator, but it's really year 1 of being the offensive coordinator. So what do you expect out of a guy who's done so much in 7 years as an assistant coach?
I know how competitive Brian Hartline is. I know how much football knowledge he has. I know how much passion he has for being in the facility, building relationships with his players, developing, the craft. He is obsessed with football. He's obsessed with competition. So, and I think he's a pretty bright guy. I don't think he enjoys talking about the maturation process of a coach. or learning the ins and outs of being a play caller. He seems to get a little annoyed with that because he's been under such a unique spotlight given what happened 2 years ago, and the push and pull, and Ryan Day ultimately, yanking the headset back and calling those plays at that time. So I can understand the annoyance there, which also feeds into, I think, that competitive streak in him. I would be very surprised if he didn't take this challenge. And I know he's taking it seriously, but I'd be surprised if he didn't meet it. There haven't really been things in Brian Hartline's life that he's like, you would say, well, he failed at that. He can't do that. I think I've had a chance a couple of summers at the coach's golf outing to play with him, and he picks up a golf club once a year, and he's hitting the ball 350 yards off the tee, and made a 50-foot putt to help us finish third last year and win a prize. And that's with no practice, because that's just, now, does that mean that he's going to go be a great play caller? No, but it is an example, I think, of what natural gifts he has. The thing that's interesting here with this is that it's not about his natural gifts. This is a mental challenge in calling plays and feeling the flow and trying to maintain what has happened before with Chip Kelly and Ryan Day calling plays. So I think he's going to meet it, Berm, but we have to wait and see. There's no way to know just because he's on a headset in spring practice.
Yeah, if there's one thing that I think is encouraging me to believe that he's going to not just meet the moment, but probably exceed it, because that's what, as you said, it's what he's done at every stop in his career. And I'm not speaking out of turn here, because I've told Brian this personally. I think he's made mention of it. It's been mentioned in press conference settings and other public conversations as well. The change in him as a person in the last 2 years is far greater than the distance he had to go as an offensive coordinator. And he is so dialed in now and so much different, so much more focused. And I don't like to use the word maturity for a 37-year-old, but when you're a guy that's grown up and you've been a national elite level athlete your whole life can be viewed at times pretty easy. And I think that once you finally get to that point where things get difficult, you really determine what someone's made out of, what their mettle is. And Brian Hartline has risen to the occasion. He had a potentially very embarrassing and almost life-ending moment two plus years ago. And he has bounced back from that in a way as a person that I think it does not get enough credit for. And that, I think, is then extrapolating itself into a change as a coach, and the commitment he's made to learning the game. And I think Chip Kelly deserves a lot of credit for this. In the last year, the growth he's had as just an understander of offense and not just catching the football and running routes has been really impressive. And that's why there was no hesitation from Ryan Day to give him this opportunity this time around, because there is an argument, I think, to be made out there that after hiring Bill O'Brien and then hiring Chip Kelly and winning a national championship, all of the stuff it took off of Ryan Day's plate, I think that there's an argument that people could have very easily made to Ryan Day to say, this is the way you need to keep going. And he said, no, you know what? Brian has earned this, and Brian has put himself in a position to have this opportunity. And again, it's hard to see it not working based on what we've seen out of Brian as a human in the last couple of years.
Well, and aside from that, I think the situation that he's walking into is a little bit different than a couple of years ago, not just with him personally, but with the roster construction. Ohio State it's not like they weren't recruiting at a high level. It's not like they didn't have really good wide receivers 2 years ago, but they had, the uncertainty going on with a quarterback situation and going back and forth with Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. The offensive line was in a little bit of a period of flux. The running game wasn't really constructed, in a way that maybe would have done Brian Hartline any favors as a first-time play caller. And I think, there's still going to be questions. We'll get to the offensive line and who's going to be at tackle and what do you do with the guards. And we've touched on the running back situation already, but I think all of that is coming a long way and a different way than the way that group was built a couple of years ago. Now there is a quarterback situation that has to be settled, and that adds a little bit more to Brian Hartline's plate here as well. And figuring out, how to get the football to these wide receivers. But Julian Sain and Lincoln Keynotes both have high level ability. So I think that there's the confidence comes from the top with Ryan Day, and he has confidence in Brian Hartline. Brian Hartline, as I mentioned on Freaky Friday with the tight ends, has confidence in Keenan Bailey, knows Billy Fessler. And then, so there may be even like the most intrigue is just like, what does Tyler Bowen do to put the run game together to help Brian Hartline? Because they all have to be together on the same page. And again, maybe it's too much optimism. Maybe it's hyperbole. When I say I'd be very surprised if the Ohio State offense is not again one of the best in the country, like I fully mean that. I don't believe there's going to be a step back with Brian Hartline. I just don't.
No, I don't think there should be. I mean, again, college football or football in general is not that complicated when it comes down to it. Like, do you have good quarterback play? Do you have good offensive line play? If you have those things, generally speaking, you're going to find ways to be successful, especially when you have receivers like Ohio State does. What I think's interesting, and I don't know that we've had any opportunity to really talk about it with Hartline or with Ryan Day or anyone else. How much input does Brian Hartline have in the quarterback discussion? Mm-hmm. How much input does Brian Hartline now as the offensive coordinator have in quarterback recruiting, for example? Like Ohio State is still looking for a quarterback in the class of 2026. And I know Brian Hartline has been on the road and visiting quarterbacks. And so like, how much impact does he have? How much does his input matter in that regard? Because for him and for the Ohio State offense to be at its best, the goal for this season has to be pretty simple. And it's, how do you get the ball to number 4 as frequently as possible? And how do you let him like determine the entirety of the season? Because Jeremiah Smith is not human. And if he gets the football, good things are going to happen. There were games a year ago when you had Emeka Egbuka, you have Travion Henderson, you have Quinshon Judkins, you have known quantities, you have known commodities around Jeremiah Smith, and he was sort of the piece that was plucked in the cherry on top. Now he is the entire cake. And you have other pieces, James Peoples and Darnell Tate and Brandon Inniss and even Max Clare, guys that are new to the system, that Jeremiah Smith gets all the focus now. You can't isolate him. So who's the guy that's going to make sure that Jeremiah Smith is getting the ball 10 times a game? And how much input does Brian Hartline have in that? Because if Jeremiah Smith doesn't get the ball 10 times a game, Ohio State's going to have some very upset fans.
Well, and it's probably not going to be the most productive version of itself if he's not touching the football that often. And, you know, there's the old give and take that you can't force it. Although maybe with Jeremiah Smith, you can. If teams are going to double and triple team Jeremiah Smith, great. Like Darnell Tate and Brandon Inniss and Max Clare are going to eat those teams alive. So, you know, we've seen that there were games, especially, you know, including in the playoff run, you know, Texas was intent on, you know, trying to take Jeremiah Smith out of that game. And
Notre Dame, and Jeremiah didn't have a catch in the second half until the final.
Yeah, third and Jeremiah. So, like, that's the risk you run, though. You have to balance that. How much do you need and want the football in Jeremiah Smith's hand versus how much are you just going to take what the defense gives you? You know, you don't want it to be easy for opponents to just eliminate your best offensive weapon or the best offensive weapon in college football. You know, I think that the Rose Bowl was a pretty good example of using Jeremiah Smith in different ways and moving him around the formation, putting him in motion, slot JJ, some things like that. I think you're just going to have to continue to see that, because if you just line him up in one spot, everyone in the world knows that he's going to get double covered and maybe triple covered. And there may be benefits to that at times because of what that opens up for everybody else. But, you know, again, I don't know what the perfect solution is for that. And I don't think that every team is going to want to dedicate 3 defenders at a time to stopping him, although that's probably the only way that you can. I think it's the level of respect for him and the hype is at a level that a year ago I was a little hesitant to embrace it. And
you
now
were?
I was, even though after seeing him in spring, because I'm like, I know he's good. I know he's extremely good. Like, he's going to be the best player in college football by December. That seems like a lot to ask of for true freshman. And maybe I should have been less reticent to embrace that the way that you were. Now I feel like he's not getting enough credit. This was funny to me. I can't remember if it was on 247 or on 3, but they had like the best quarterback wide receiver tandems in the country, ranked 1 through 10. And number 2 was Ohio State. And they didn't know who the starting quarterback was going to be. They said Julian Sayin or Lincoln Kienholz with Jeremiah Smith as number 2. And I thought, that's an insult to Jeremiah Smith because anybody could go throw the football to
Who'd
him.
they have number 1?
Arizona State has the best, if you can wrap your mind around that.
I cannot.
So that's why I thought, there we go. That's some bulletin board material for Brian Hartline, is that he's number 2 basically by himself, with this person not even knowing who's going to play quarterback for Ohio State yet.
Yeah, I think that maybe there's a touch of Ohio State / Jeremiah Smith fatigue in some of these instances.
He's only been out here for 1 year.
But he's and let's keep the Jeremiah Smith slide up here for a minute if we can. To try and fully grasp how insane it is that he has not only met but exceeded the expectations for him coming in to Ohio State as a true freshman. This is a guy who was for 2 years the number 1 ranked high school recruit in the country as a wide receiver. That just doesn't happen. Okay. Like it just doesn't occur. There's quarterbacks out there every year that get put into that position just because they're quarterbacks or defensive ends. When Jeremiah Smith is so different. And that's why a year ago, I had no problem sitting around talking about he is going to be the face of college football. Like he is, if you find it, folks, just search Marvin Harrison, Austin and Berm or whatever, and go back to a conversation we had with Marv in March, where he called him, Marvin Harrison, the number 4 pick in the NFL draft 2 years ago,
a Heisman Trophy finalist,
the Heisman Trophy finalist, a Blitnikoff winner, and the son of a Hall of Famer at wide receiver, called Jeremiah Smith the LeBron James of football. And I don't know that people, because the scouting world, the recruiting world wasn't the same 25 years ago when LeBron was coming up through the ranks. I was 19 years old at the time. So I was paying attention as a kid in Ohio watching LeBron. The expectations for him were so ridiculous. They were so insane. And every time he went out on the court, he did something that bettered them. And you're like, this can't keep going. He can't keep getting away with it. And then he did. Every single time he went out, it was better. And I had a conversation on Wednesday of this week with a 5-star wide receiver named Dakota Garant, and he's out of Detroit. And I asked him about Jeremiah Smith and the impact of Jeremiah Smith. And like he just said, like, he's changed everything. If you want to be that guy, that's who you have to be. And so like he is now the standard. He's when recruits come to practice at Ohio State, when we were at, was it Michigan State last year? We were at Michigan State last year, right?
Yep.
Michigan State was parading their recruits around the field, walking their recruits around the field pregame. And every recruit stopped on the Ohio State side to be like, oh my God, there's Jeremiah Smith. Oh my God, there's JJ. Where's number 4? Like, he is bigger than life on the football field. And yet, every instance, he has surpassed what the expectation is. And I don't care if he's triple teamed this year. He's still going to be the best receiver in the country. It's like, to me, it's Joey Bosa in 2015 when Joey had 3 guys guarding him every week. And like, if he got a sack, it was like, oh my God, I cannot believe he got a sack. That's what's going to happen with Jeremiah. He's so good. And the expectations are going to continue to be through the roof. And that's why Arnell Tate and Brandon Inniss and these guys, like, they're older than JJ. They played with him since he was in 8th grade, so they know him pretty well. Mm-hmm. But even those guys who are supreme wide receiver talents, like they don't even, there's not even a sniff of jealousy or like being annoyed at the conversation around him. Emeka Egbuka, who's a 1st-round draft pick in the NFL draft this past year, didn't even argue the point that JJ is the best receiver on the team. Like he's so different. And it's truly something I hope Ohio State fans are appreciating in the moment, because you are never going to see a wide receiver prospect like this as a young guy at Ohio State ever.
Yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. I would say, because we've spent a lot of time talking about Hartline and Jeremiah Smith, which is what anchors everything for Ohio State. I had a conversation with our friend Anthony Schlegel last week, and
getting bumpy.
It was bumpy. It was juicy. And he was just talking about some of the guys who had impressed him in the weight room. He's not around as frequently as he was at this time a year ago. But the name that kept coming up, and it doesn't surprise me. We mentioned the leadership. Like, he just kept talking about this rise for Brandon Inniss. And with all the time that we've spent sort of at the top with JJ and Carnell, and then looking at the next, chapter in there with Mylan Graham or Bryson Rogers or Quincy Porter, I don't know that we've spent enough time talking about the importance that Brandon Inniss has, not just because he's already been on the leadership committee, because he's already been an example in the weight room, and because he's been shown leadership by sacrificing some of his role a year ago when Emeka Egbuka came back. The fact that Emeka is now gone, all of that stuff is going to fall on somebody's shoulders. That's the on-field and the off-field. And I think the on-field impact from Brandon Inniss, we may not have spent enough time talking about what that could look like, because he has had to wait 2 years. But you know it better than anybody, that recruiting profile and the expectations for him when he was on the rise, like, that was no joke either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had a number of conversations about Brandon on this, on our shows and things in the past couple of years. And I've said repeatedly, he's the most competitive wide receiver I've ever seen. He is the guy that I think, like, stirs the drink. I want to just listen to this. I feel like finally my time is now, and I feel like I've been patient. I've never questioned the decision I made to come here. I knew how to stick through hard times, and I feel like it's finally paying off. I feel like now I'm seeing the vision from what Coach Hart used to tell me in recruiting. Like, it's 3 years into his process, and he's finally starting to see the fruits of it. And I think that we are living in a world that requires and demands instant gratification in a lot of ways and immediate success. And then again, someone like Jeremiah Smith comes along that completely upsets the apple cart, and you think that that's normal, and it's not. What Brandon Inniss is doing heading into year 3 is normal. Like, this is the path. This is the way it used to be for everyone.
Yeah.
But there are anomalies, and Brandon Inniss is not an anomaly as far as his physical talent, but he is an anomaly as far as what he can do as a leader. And that's why, like, I think one of Brian Hartline's biggest challenges this year as an offensive coordinator, and I think he's got a much harder road than Chip Kelly did a year ago as a offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Let's be clear about that. But, like, he gets to lean on one of his guys that he's known forever. And I think that he can actually get a lot of what he wants out there through Brandon Inniss in a way that I don't think Chip Kelly would have had an opportunity to do coming in as a first-year guy that was learning who the players are. So Brandon Inniss can be a de facto coach on the field. He can be that inspirational guy. And I think that he's perfect for it. I think Brandon is the ideal teammate and a guy that people should really, really love to see succeed this year. And he's going to succeed. Like, I have no doubt about that.
My wheels were spinning back at the start of the show when you were talking about the Terry McLaurin impact and the leader not necessarily being the best wide receiver. And I think they did have that more recently. I think Xavier Johnson qualified for that. But
yeah, I mean, he could certainly be that guy.
So
it's an interesting comparison, I think, because obviously the type of player that Brandon Inniss is, he's an elevated, enhanced version of Xavier Johnson.
Evolutionary X.
Yeah, he's an evolutionary X. So I like that. I think that we're waiting to see if Brandon Inniss can be an Emeka Egbuka type of receiver, a guy that can move in and out and stretch the field and be a reliable pass catcher and be the aggressive guy in run blocking, which we saw Brandon do multiple times last year. Absolutely. I mean, he had one of the biggest touchdowns of the year last year was Brandon Inniss against Penn State, and people will never. Well, it doesn't get talked about because that game sort of became meaningless.
It was known for other things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting conversation because I don't know what the proper context is to view Brandon Inniss this year. Because again, we want to see Mylan Graham. We want to see Bryson Rogers. We want to see these other guys step up. And I don't think as good as Jeremiah Smith is, as smooth and the potential that Carnell Tate has as a potential first round pick, and he's being put in all those mock drafts as a first rounder. Brandon Inniss, I think, is the guy that can ultimately turn the offense into a juggernaut if he's able to be a like for like replacement for Emeka.
Yeah, agree with that.
What do you think? Let me ask you this. I got one more question for you here.
Okay, hit me with it.
With Brian Hartline heading into this season, is there more pressure on him this season or in the 23 season?
More pressure
on Hartline as an offensive coordinator heading into 23, the first go round. And let's even go back to this time in 23 when we were expecting him to be the play caller and then Ryan Day took it away from him. Is there more pressure on him now to step up, or is it mitigated because Ohio State won the national championship and this year is a quote unquote refresh?
I think if you asked Brian Hartline, that he would say that he feels the pressure every single day, and this is a new challenge that he's not embraced before. I think if you're asking me from the outside, would I expect there to be more exterior pressure on Brian Hartline now or 2 years ago? I think the answer would have been 2 years ago, because that applies to the entirety of the coaching staff. They had not won this national championship. There was still questions about winning the big game, getting through a playoff. And part of the reason that I think Ryan Day took the controls back was because of the gravity of the situation and the uncertainty at quarterback, and that he wanted. He's never phrased it this way, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but like, he didn't want any blame if it went sideways 2 years ago to fall on Brian Hartline and derail his career trajectory. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I'd love to know if there was some of that logic in Ryan Day's brain.
Yeah, and maybe they don't.
To me, if we go back in time, it seems like that would have been a good way for Ryan Day to deflect some of the pressure off of himself.
100%. And so that may be one of those things that is never spelled out explicitly. That would be my read on it, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe even in real time, because it felt like that year was pretty disjointed at times offensively, which is why we kept saying that Ryan Day needed to give up the play calling. But I think we could go round and round on that, but I think the pressure was greater on everybody 2 years ago. And I'm not saying that the pressure is off because they won a national championship. And the evaluation of Brian Hartline is going to be analyzed and microscopic starting in late August, like with his very first opportunity. Every play call in that game is going to be analyzed, and that's going to be the new order of business for him every single week. So there is that pressure. But like, if there are games that are less than ideal, I think it helps not just that Ohio State won the national championship, but also that they won the national championship last year with some game plans from Chip Kelly or some play calls from Chip Kelly. They're like, I don't know if that's the actual work of a true genius there. And I think that helped Ryan Day. I think that will help Brian Hartline. I think that could help the entire program. Like, it's not always going to be perfect. And from that regard, I would say in the sum total, I view like there's less pressure on that now than there was 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think the egg that got laid by Chip Kelly a couple times last year, as far as the play calling and the game planning went, is something that will be to Brian Hartline's benefit, because it's like, if even one of the legendary play callers in the history of the sport has a day where it looks like he has no idea what he's doing, then maybe it's okay to not expect Brian Hartline to be flawless day in and day out. So,
yeah, we'll see. That day's coming. Yeah, we're one day closer. Got this one out of the way, kicking off the week with another spring rewind as we barrel through May. We're going to have...
You're going to have Talking Tuesday with Adam the King this week?
We're going to try and get a little Talking Tuesday going with Adam. Many of you enjoyed his passion last week. I sure did. So hoping to keep that going for you all. I think
he's so handsome.
He's just... television's Adam King is one of one. I think we should maybe plan on the end of the week being a mailbag. We get to that. So just hit us up all week long, wherever you can leave comments, feedback, anywhere you want to. Send some questions. We'll get to that at the end of the week. We'll put all that together heading into Memorial Day weekend, which is already here, and the end of school. Gosh, I can't believe that's arrived either. But that's good. That's a good sign, because that means that the off season is moving along, and we thank you for spending.
That means June 1st is coming.
Woo! And that is going to be a fun month for everybody. Looking forward to that. Thanks for spending part of your day with us here on The Beat. For Burham, I am Austin. We'll talk to you later.